Hey, folks. Sorry about that. I thought the music was on loop, but it wasn't. But anyway, I hope you didn't catch me. I did a good 25 minutes straight of picking my nose just before I started, and I wasn't sure if that was on camera. I'm hoping it was. Also, there was a 35-minute bout of. Of jacking off because I wanted to pull a little Jeffrey tube in there from CNN. Uh, no, anyway, sorry about that. But I hope you're here for all of it. You're here for all of it, all of what we're here for. Uh, anyway, thanks for joining me. And now is really when I feel like this should begin. I feel like whatever the fuck just happened does not really count as the beginning. All right. Well, as you can see, I'm not in my regular locale, but thanks for joining me. Please take a second to click the thumbs up and the subscribe, because let's be honest, me trying to get the microphone in the right position is something that should really get a good solid thumbs up for that. So, all right. Well, let's just dive into it. This is so it was covered a little by the mainstream media. I'm going to be showing it in a article from from NBC, but it's covered a little by the mainstream media. But they're not acting like this is being done for the actual reasons it's being done. Very obvious reasons this is being done if you understand what has happened over the past few years. And just to give you a little background, I mean, you guys remember this. The U.S. primaries between the Democrats and Bernie Sanders versus Hillary, etc., were rigged against Bernie Sanders both times in a million different ways. I covered some of them, or as many as I could. Obviously, it because of there was less suppression the first time around in 2016, it was easier to cover, and so you more people heard about it, etc. But so the Democrats have looked for a variety of ways to make sure that never happens again, that the ruling establishment like Bernie Sanders, the ruling establishment like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton never have to go up against legitimate progressives. Now, I have plenty of criticisms of Bernie Sanders, but I would say of the Democratic Party, he is the progressive wing, not left, not leftist, but the progressive wing. And they want to make sure that never happens again. So they've done a variety of things over the past few years to try and make sure that a Bernie Sanders type figure, I don't think it'll be him again, but a Bernie Sanders type figure won't ever have that much power, that much ability to almost win this thing. I mean, and really, he would have won it if they hadn't had a bunch of different rigging techniques. I'll try and mention a few of them here in a minute, but and so we see this, and it's done kind of in piecemeal, in various ways to slowly make sure, solidify the establishment. One of the ones that I covered when it happened was back in the last election, not this midterm, but the one before that, the presidential election. The DNC had passed something saying that the DNC chair could at any time say that a presidential candidate was not Democrat enough, and in his speeches, in his speech, etc., and they could get rid of it. I mean, him or her. They could cut him off. They could just say, "Oh yeah, you may have won the primary, but you're not Democratic enough. You don't represent us." And they quietly put that in there, and that gives them a nuclear option at any point. If someone of a Bernie Sanders type figure were to ever win the primary for president, the DNC could step in and say, "Yeah, never mind, didn't count." So that was put in before the 20. What's this year? What year is it? Feels like it's been 13 years over the past 3 years. The 2020 election, 2020 election, yeah. But so that's one of the things they did. Okay, so here's the latest thing that is barely getting talked about, honestly. The Democrats' advance plan to reorder the primary calendar. So they did this suddenly. Joe Biden and his ilk, along with the heads of the DNC, dropped this in without warning the states, without warning just about anyone. They said, well, I'll just go through it. The Democrats advanced a plan Friday to reorder the early voting states in the presidential primary calendar, one that would put South Carolina first. And does anyone recall I think the only state Joe Biden won in the early portion of the campaign? He either won or he got one of the top. He was one of the top like 2 or something in South Carolina, and so that was it. South Carolina was the first state, and I think it was third. Was the first state, third or fourth, first state to where Joe Biden had any kind of substantial showing. Before that, he was just getting wrecked. And then the only reason he won was because Obama called all the other candidates except for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and told them all to drop out and endorse Joe Biden, which they all did. And they were offered various things. Buttigieg was offered a position in the cabinet, which he got. But that's the only way Joe Biden ended up winning, along with tons of others. Shenanery. I just made up a new word. So South Carolina first, jettison Iowa, and demote New Hampshire. I don't even know what jettison Iowa means. Put it late, very late. At a meeting in Washington, a key panel at the Democratic National Committee approved the proposal, which was put forward by President Joe Biden a day earlier. The only dissent came from representatives of Iowa and New Hampshire, the two states that were fucking knocked out of the calendar. The overall calls for South Carolina to hold its Democratic primary on February 3rd, followed by Nevada and New Hampshire on February 6th. Georgia would hold its primary on February 13th, with Michigan rounding out the early voting on February 27th. So Iowa wouldn't be anywhere in the early voting. And here's why that is. Iowa, despite having issues, is a caucus. It's not voting machines. And in a caucus, and Bernie Sanders nearly won Iowa. Well, he basically won Iowa both times. It was just rigged against him in various ways both times. But they had to go above and beyond to rig Iowa against Bernie Sanders. In the first time around, 2016, they had to just get people to count the votes wrong, which the votes being reported from the caucuses were then altered to, try and say Hillary Clinton won and then say, oh, she barely won. And in the next campaign, 2020, they had the shadow app, right? Do you guys remember this? The notorious shadow app. So basically 2 weeks before the Iowa caucus, they announced that all of the numbers that are collected in the caucuses are going to be put through this app that is going to tally everything. And the app completely is a catastrophe. It completely crashes. No one knows what the numbers are. The numbers are all wrong. All those things are going on. And everyone's like, where the fuck did this catastrophic app come from? Because up until that day, or 2 weeks before, Iowa had done their caucuses with no problem, for the most part, for fucking years. And then you introduce this, literally called the shadow app. I'm not making a joke there. The shadow app. And it turns out that Buttigieg's campaign, along with others, created the shadow app, which then crashed. And on top of crashing, they didn't know, a lot of these people didn't know how to use it. So you have caucus, whatever they're called, captains, I guess, captains that don't know how to put the numbers in and everything. Hey, thanks, Amin. They don't know how to put it in. They don't know how to use it, all these things. And all of this seems to be done by, intentionally. Like, I don't know that they wanted the app to crash, maybe, but they wanted it to be confusing. They wanted it to be a catastrophe. They wanted to have control over the numbers, all of these things. And what this allowed was for Buttigieg to come out and announce himself winner without the numbers in. So basically, this held off the announcing, the legit announcing of the numbers long enough that Buttigieg could, and others, I suppose, but it ended up being Buttigieg, could walk out and say, yeah, I won. Thanks, everybody. When in fact, Bernie Sanders had won the caucuses. But the thing about the Iowa caucus is, in caucuses, you have to get together with your other human beings and discuss what's happening in the election. You have to get together with other humans and go, oh, you like so and so, why do you like that person, and what, oh really, oh, that's interesting, oh, that's a good point, I had forgotten that Hillary Clinton did that, and you actually have discussions. It's like this civic responsibility thing. Oh my God forbid that we actually have a responsibility to our society, and we go and we help out, and we have ideas, and we discuss them with other human beings. But anyway, so that's how it works in Iowa, because it's a caucus system, not a primary system. And what that does is it almost always favors the true progressives, the people who have a long record of standing for something. And for those of you that showed up late, yes, I have a million criticisms of Bernie Sanders, not least of which is him campaigning around the country for Hillary Clinton. But in his voting and in his life, he has largely been a real progressive, as opposed to, and that doesn't mean that doesn't equal leftist, but still a real progressive, as opposed to all of these other fucking corporate garbage bags like Hillary and Biden. And so when people would get together for this caucus and they discussed this, Bernie supporters would just wipe the map. Because you'd have shifts. They do initial votes, right, where the people would show up and they wouldn't talk, and they just do initial votes just to see where things are at, and then they'd decide who doesn't have a chance. Oh, it turns out Marianne Williamson or Bill de Blasio doesn't have a shot. So if you delegates want to move to one of the people that has a shot, and then they would move over, and that would give the Bernie people and the Biden people a chance to argue their case. Well, when you try and argue the case of a shit show like Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, you generally fail when it's person to person, and a lot of people know their shit. Like, if a Hillary supporter walks up to somebody who really knows what's going on in this country, they don't last long in a discussion. So what the caucus does is it allows usually the progressives to pull a lot of people over. And Bernie did very well in both of the Iowa contests. So this meant, I should fast forward a little here, this meant that Joe Biden, the establishment, the Hillary Clintons of the world, right, they lost in New Hampshire, they lost in Iowa, they did better in Nevada, and they did much better in South Carolina. It allows them to switching this primary calendar allows them to have the states they do well in, the establishment does well in, up top, so that they can stop progressives from making forward momentum if a Bernie Sanders type movement were to ever happen again. Now, this is just another step by the DNC to make sure that no real progressives, no one who actually criticizes the corporate ruling class, ever will get close to the presidency. It's just another step. Like I said, there have been others. By the way, they were going to use the Shadow app in Nevada as well as Iowa. The thing was, after the Iowa catastrophe, then Nevada said, we're not using that fucking app. And remember how well Bernie was doing until Obama and other DNC establishment, Democratic establishment people got all of the other candidates to drop out, except for Elizabeth Warren, who they knew was probably sucking votes equally from Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So they wanted her to stay in, or maybe even sucking more votes from Bernie Sanders. So they wanted her to stay in because that would help Biden. So all of these other mainstream candidates dropped out. They all said, oh, I endorse Joe Biden because he gave me something like a cabinet position. And that's what did it. But there was actually a bunch of other rigging that went on. I covered extensively on Redacted tonight. Some of the biggest stuff was actually in court in New York. They ultimately in court, this is long after the election, they had to admit that they had purged over 100,000. I think it was like 160,000 likely Bernie voters, meaning Bernie voters, basically, from the rolls. So all those people in New York didn't get to vote because they were rigging New York for Hillary. Another example of their rigging was in Texas. They closed most of the polling locations in Hispanic areas because Hispanics were going more for Bernie, and that meant that you had long lines. You have 5-hour lines for a primary election in Texas, and people aren't going to wait that long. They don't have the time to wait that long. Their kids at the babysitter, their kids at school, whatever. They have work. So a lot of people go home, and those people going home are Bernie voters that didn't get to vote. So they rigged it in Texas in that way. And in California, this is one of the biggest ones. Greg Palast talked with me about this actually just last week. We reiterated this, that many of the Bernie voters were registered independents because they don't believe in the Democrats or Republicans, right? Democrats and Republicans are both garbage. They're both corporate garbage, but they wanted to vote for Bernie. Now in California, you can vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary, even if you're independent. You can walk in and say, "Hey, I am Democrat, for now, and I want to vote in this primary." And but the trick in the primary was they made it so that they told the poll workers, you only give them a ballot with Bernie Sanders on it if they say, I want the Democratic crossover ballot. You had to literally say those words, the word crossover. If you asked for a provisional ballot or something, or asked for a ballot and you were independent, they wouldn't give you one with Bernie Sanders on it. Anyway, it was this whole thing that was designed to make it so that most people don't know to ask for the crossover ballot. They just ask for a ballot. Another thing in California that was big in California was they told all the poll workers to just hand out something called provisional ballots to anybody who was independent, anybody who didn't show up immediately as a long-term Democrat. And what that does, these provisional ballots, and you can remember this for next election, when someone gives you a provisional ballot, it is a non-ballot. It is Greg Palast also coined the term placebo ballot. It's to make you think you voted so that you get out of their face and you go home, and those ballots are not counted. Very, very rarely are they fully counted. And here's the thing, even when they are counted. So let's say because people will go, oh, Lee Camp's lying here. Look, they were counted in this state, in this state, in this state. They're counted long after the election, long after the primary, when nothing would change. If long after the primary is already over and we have our presidential candidate for the Democrats, they were to say, hey, we finally counted the provisional ballots in Arizona, and it turns out Bernie did win or whatever. It's not mattering. At that point, it does not matter. It could have completely changed the course of history, but instead, it's too late. So provisional ballots are bullshit, and they're designed to get people to think they voted and go home. Anyway, these are just, again, that's just a small assortment of the ways the Democratic Party has tried to, rigged it against Bernie, but they're increasingly trying to make sure that no progressive could get as close as Bernie got to winning the Democratic primary. And many of you may recall that in court, the Democratic lawyers the DNC's lawyers ultimately admitted, and you can read the court transcript, they said, look, we have no legal obligation to have a legal, real primary, to have a fair primary. These are the literal words, where to have a fair primary. We could go into a smoke-filled room and pick the candidate that way. And the lawyers were saying, I don't know that I really need to rephrase it, but they're saying, yeah, it might not be fair, but it doesn't need to be fair. There's nothing in the law that says we owe people a fair primary. There's something in the law that says the actual federal election, the general election, is supposed to be a fair election. That is in our laws, but To have a fair primary is not in our laws. So these were the DNC's own lawyers saying, yeah, it would be nice if it's fair, but we don't have any legal obligation to make it fair. So just to continue from this article, the new calendar still faces hurdles before it's adopted. Numerous states were caught off guard by the White House proposal, which makes more dramatic revisions than had been expected. This proposal reflects the best of our. This is a quote from the DNC chairman, Jamie. Is it Jaime or Jamie? Jamie Harrison. I love how we don't even know who the DNC chair is. I mean, maybe you did, but I didn't. I don't even know who the DNC chairman is until they're the worst human being in the world and they're on the news every day, like Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Donna Brazil. But the DNC chair said, this proposal reflects the best of our party as a whole, and it will continue to make our party stronger. Oh, yeah? Will it? Will it, dude? So the party's Rules and Bylaws Committee have voted to approve the new schedule. Democrats have spent months debating their primary calendar, aiming to increase the diversity of states that help select the party's standard bearer and to add more general election battlegrounds to the mix. See, that's NBC News doing propaganda work for the DNC, trying to explain away why they're doing this. And they're like, oh, it's to include diversity in the states. And here's the thing. I'm all for diversity in the states. And I agree, Iowa is a very white place. But the reason Iowa tends to go progressive is because it's a caucus system. If you were to take a caucus system and put it in some of the more heavily Black and Hispanic states, you would also have often more progressive choices. So it's not that Iowa goes progressive because it's all white and the DNC is tired of being all white. That's not what it is. It's because the caucus system, where you get together and you debate it and you actually talk to human beings, and the caucus system, because you have to be there more than 12 seconds, requires people to give a shit. It requires people to go in informed a little more, usually, because who's going to spend, I don't know how long on average they spend there, but an hour or 2 hours. Sometimes I know it's much more, but let's just say an hour or 2 hours. You're not really going to do that unless you really care about these elections. Like, you're not going to spend that time. I mean, half of our country doesn't want to spend the 30 seconds it takes to vote. I get that also sometimes they wait in line for 5 hours, but a lot of areas, every time I've ever voted, it's taken about 3 minutes. So, but this is NBC News trying to do, play defense for the DNC. They want more diversity and they want more general election battlegrounds into the mix. Why would that fucking matter? That doesn't matter. Whether it's a battleground and it's earlier in the calendar, that doesn't matter at all. And so it has nothing to do with moving battleground states earlier into the mix. Bullshit. But with Republicans sticking with Iowa and New Hampshire as their first two nominating states, officials from both parties in those states are threatening to hold the Democratic contest on the same day as the GOP ones, regardless of what action the DNC takes. So Iowa and New Hampshire especially, who are getting fucked by this, are threatening to do it anyway, do their primaries anyway on the dates that they wanted to. So ignore the DNC, but the DNC is putting in bigger threats. The DNC clarified penalties for states that do not comply with the new dates. States that schedule their primaries in defiance of the DNC would automatically lose half their delegates to the party's national convention. So they're getting completely fucked. In a new provision added to DNC bylaws this year, candidates can be punished for campaigning in states that jump the line. Jump the line. Candidates who put their name on the ballot in one of these states would also be penalized to the point of losing all their delegates from that state. So it's like basically, oh yeah, you can still have your primary in the date you had planned to, but we'll make it meaningless. We'll take away half your delegates. We'll punish the candidates. Yeah. So this is This is the DNC trying to make sure that that progressives will never get as close as they got with Bernie Sanders to winning the presidency. That's all it says. And very few people are talking about this. And by the way, this was revealed. This vote was revealed on a Friday, which Friday is the news dump day, right? That's the news. They put that shit out when they don't want people to hear about it. And on a Friday that was immediately after the midterm election. So basically, when people care the least about elections, and it's a Friday, they did everything to try and cover this shit up. Just amazing. Amazing. All right. I spent too long on that. Let's keep going. By the way, if you're getting $1 worth out of this discussion right now, please become a member at leecamp.net. That's the only way. I'm completely independent, so that's the only way I fund any of this shit, which is not shit. It's the only way I fund any of this shit that's not shit. Any of this amazing, golden, glistening shit. That is the only way I fund it. Stephen Donziger just tweeted this out. And I thought I'd give you some good news, right? After all that, after standard terrible news. Los Angeles voted 12-0 to ban new drilling and to close all 5,000 existing oil and gas wells in the city. That's pretty incredible. 12-0 to ban all new drilling. Now, unfortunately, this is just Los Angeles, but still. This is a historic victory for Stand LA and all citizens over the oil industry and environmental racism. Never forget, we hold the power. And let me show you the article from Los Angeles Times, which is behind a paywall, so you have to look at it on a fucking like PDF document or whatever this is. Fuck you, LA Times. Also, fuck you for firing Bob Scheer and everybody else that actually mattered at your goddamn paper till you became shills. Los Angeles Times, an historic move. Los Angeles bans new oil wells, phases out existing ones. I love that this oil well is like on a baseball stadium. Like literally, these baseball players, probably like little league teams, fucking over gas fumes just emanating into their faces. Los Angeles City Council voted Friday to phase out all oil drilling in LA and ban new wells, a historic move in a city that was built by a once booming petroleum industry and whose residents have suffered with decades of environmental consequences as a result. In a 12-0 vote, the council approved a new ordinance that immediately bans new oil and gas extraction and requires that all existing oil and gas extractions stop production within 20 years. Oh, man. Dude, it should have been within 10 minutes. Dude, there's always a fucking caveat in these things. Even when you're like, we're winning. Well, we'll be winning in 20 years. But the other thing with this fucking 20 years crap is that it gives these companies and these corporations way too much time to put a mayor in there that will undo it and just keep it going. Like, that's why this, like JP Morgan Chase, and you can learn about this in my new episode of Most Censored News this week. JP Morgan Chase said they're going to net zero emissions. That they are the top funder, by the way, of fossil fuels in the world in terms of banks. JP Morgan Chase said they're going to net zero. Wow. That would be great. The top funder stops funding any fossil fuels. They said they're doing that by 2050. Yeah, great. So long after we've got any shot of doing anything about the climate crisis, then we're going to stop funding fossil fuels. And also any of the management or whatever that made that statement, made that promise, made that decision, they'll all be gone. They'll be either dead or in diapers. And so the people that take over, say in 10 years, 20 years, they'll quite possibly just undo that. So, but the move is opposed by the oil industry, you think, whose leaders warn city officials that the phase out will hurt cities' finances. Oh, yeah, will it? Yeah, you know what else will hurt LA's finances? The fact it's going to be on fire. It's actually already on fire. If you know anything about LA or you've been to LA or you've heard about LA, it's fucking on fire. Okay. Literally, you can drive down the highway in LA at certain times and see the hills on fire. Literally. And yet, these people are like, yeah, it's not going to be good for your finances to cut out oil. Not to, on top of that, LA is just covered in a blanket of smog. What do you think that smog comes from? People get cancer in LA at a much higher rate. What do you think that smog comes from? It comes from goddamn cars and businesses. That's where all of it comes from. That's what you're inhaling if you live in LA. And I'm sorry, I know some of you live in LA. I have family in LA. I've been to LA for weeks on end. You're inhaling all of that shit constantly. And yet, big oil is like, hey, this is going to hurt your finances. This is not going to be good for your finances. According to the city's planning department, LA has 26 oil and gas fields and more than 5,000 oil and gas wells. Some of the wells are active while others are idle. So that's the other caveat. By the way, I want to still celebrate this as a win, but the other caveat is that this is only LA. This is not like all of California or something. But still a win and still stand LA. I want to commend you guys. I want to commend all of the people who fight for these type of moves because this only comes from, like, this shit only happens when people are like in the streets, glued to doors, chaining themselves to pipelines, fucking dumping fake oil on the ground outside the mayor's office or whatever it takes. That's the only time this stuff happens. Really, none of this has happened because people asked politely. There's no example of politicians or corporate America going, there's 8 people outside who said they'd really like it if we stopped raping the environment and destroying the world, and that they'd like to see an animal at some point in the future. It looks like it's up to 9 people and a dog. But they asked very politely, okay, let's do it. Let's get that done. Yes, totally. We are a $12 billion corporation, but those 9 people are not to be ignored because they asked politely. I wouldn't, if they showed up mean and angry, but those people, a couple of them offered me a sugar wafer when I was walking in here. Very nice, folks. Very nice. So I say, let's do this. Completely undermines our complete profit margin and everything else, but we need to do this. Plus, the dog has a sign around its neck saying no more oil. So, a cute dog with a sign around its neck. Story over. All right, but congrats, LA. Let's see. I got one more story, and then I'm going to rumble.com/LeeCamp. Free to join me over there. But let me show you this one. This is again from Alan McLeod. I'm sorry, he just says such amazing work. Well, it's his comment, but it's not his article. The article's from The Independent. And it says, nurses must drop their pay demands. So I assume there's a nurse union in the UK that's fighting right now. Nurses must drop their pay demands to, quote, send a clear message to Putin, cabinet minister says. The UK cabinet minister said that the nurse union has to drop their goddamn demands for reasonable pay. And then the continued quote is, this is a time to come together and send a very clear message to Mr. Putin that we're not going to be divided in this way. That we're not going to be divided in this way. That we're not going to, as workers, we're not going to stand up for anything or ask for reasonable pay or any of that. We're just going to fight the new Cold War and obliterate Ukraine via a proxy war, and yeah, never ask for a raise or anything like that. And then Alan McLeod's comment is, heads up, new union busting talking point just dropped. So I can guarantee you this is not the first, and this will not be the last time that they have used this as a talking point. That you can't, all you workers out there who are daring to demand reasonable pay, reasonable perks and benefits. They call them benefits, but really they should be rights. They're not benefits. It's not, your health care shouldn't be a benefit. It should be a fucking right. Your paid sick leave, your ability to take paternity leave, they shouldn't be called benefits. They should be called goddamn rights. For and anybody calling them a benefit is selling something. Yeah, I mean, the benefit is a euphemism. It was created by the business community to act like you're getting these special perks. Yeah, no, they're human rights, healthcare. But anyway, this shit about you have to do it because of Putin. Hashtag because Putin. I mean, it's so pathetic and it's so sad. So anyway, it's unbelievable that the Independent would cover this as a legitimate, and that the cabinet minister would say this is just sick. And it's just, this is all the same new Cold War horseshit. Hey, everybody get in line. And actually this fits in with everything I've said about just nation states in general. Is they have to, the nation state has to keep you in line, and people stay in line and don't demand more, like pay raises, when they're afraid. When they're afraid and they need security, people tend to stay in line more. So if you say, hey, that big bad other is going to get you, then people don't stand up and demand more. They don't stand up and fight the ruling class the way they should, the way we all should. If we all, meaning, and I don't mean Americans, I mean the fucking world, were to unite the working class against the ruling class, that shit would be over in a day. All right, you'd have the working class running everything. And I don't mean just running the countries. I mean running the goddamn companies. For anyone who forgets, just remember that every corporation is set up as a totalitarian structure. So when we hear all this great stuff about democracy is the best policy, the best way to run things, the best way to set things up, the best way to set up a society, when they tell you all that, oh, it's interesting, because in all the corporations in America, there's no democracy. It's a complete totalitarian structure. It's sometimes one person really making all the calls. And at best, it's, a board, a dozen people or something, making all the decisions for 1,000 people, 10,000 people. I mean, how many people work at Amazon or some shit, or Starbucks? And how many people make the decisions for those human beings? It's a totalitarian structure, and we're told democracy is the best policy. But what I was thinking about, what I was saying about nation states, they need to keep a big bad other to keep you in line. And we've seen the big bad other, and I'm speaking now for America, shift over the years, but it always has to be there. So for a long time it was the Soviet menace and the Soviet Union and Red China, and then that faded. We started working with China, and the Soviet Union fell. And so we didn't have them anymore. And there's a brief period, and you can tell this from the movies in Hollywood. And I don't know if other people have really talked much about this. There's a brief period pre 9/11, going back to when the Soviet Union fell, so 91. Brief period where the menace in Hollywood couldn't be the evil Russians anymore. I mean, it could, but it seemed antiquated, it's evil Russian Soviet who's still walking around. Couldn't really be the evil Russians anymore. We were done with the German Nazi thing. You can't really still act like it's evil Germans. We hadn't done the war on terror yet, so it wasn't the evil Arab thing too much. So there was this blank space from 91 to like 2001. And again, there's there's some gray scale there because obviously it takes time for Hollywood to shift over and things like that. But and I was watching, what was it? Is it Die Hard? In Die Hard 1, the evil menace is like a German radical who, yes, he sounds scary because he has a German accent, played by Jeremy Irons. Or actually, people say his accent sucks, but or is weird, but close to German accent. But he's like a mishmash German radical where you feel creeped out because he has almost German accent, but you don't really. That it's not Germany, it's not Nazi. It's just German radical. And then the second Die Hard, and I don't know why I'm mainly using Die Hard, but the second Die Hard, the bad guy is ultimately a faction of the U.S. military, which that started happening, where you start seeing movies where the bad guys are the U.S. military. Oh dear God! Mixed with they were working with Cuba, so it was like, oh, we still hate Cuba. Could still be a Cuban evil guy. And there's a lot of other good examples, but the beginning of Rambo, although it became a very just U.S. pro-war centric movie, it was about a fucking vet that lost his mind and was killing people. Like, that's what it was. Now, I admit Rambo, I think the first Rambo came out in the 80s, so that fucks up my time scale a little. But I'm just saying there was that, like, when I was growing up, you didn't walk into the movie knowing that every bad guy was going to be like. So then 2001 happens and we go, oh, all the bad guys are Arab terrorists. And then now we're back into evil Russian, evil Chinese. I mean, mainly Russian. And this, obviously, this isn't every movie. This is the movies that are in league with the Pentagon, which the Pentagon has, and I've covered this a lot with on Government Secrets, my podcast, my other podcast. We've covered how the Pentagon now owns Hollywood far more than it used to, and so any military movie you see is, you're not going to see any Full Metal Jackets and Platoon and stuff anymore. And Apocalypse Now, like, that shit doesn't really come out anymore. By the way, I have to say, for Avatar was one of the few blockbuster, like, big Hollywood movies that is anti-U.S. military. I mean, yes, one of the U.S. military guys becomes the savior, the white savior. Plenty of criticisms you can have for that, but in general, it's a very anti-U.S. military movie. And so I don't know what this new Avatar will bring. So maybe it'll be another anti-U.S. Military movie. Wonder if Hollywood would allow that right now. All right, let's move on. And this topic is, there are few topics as important as this one. Latin America's plan to challenge U.S. dollar hegemony. And I know that for people that are unfamiliar with dollar hegemony and things like that, it may sound a little boring, but trust me, it's not. And it could change everything. It is hugely pivotal. Pivotal? Did I add a syllable in there? Pivotal in world events. And all right, so. But I'm going to cover that one at rumble.com/Lee Camp. So I hope you'll join me over there. Completely free to join over there and watch and comment. There's no charge. So join me at rumble.com/Lee Camp. And if you think you've gotten $1, literally $1 out of this, like $1, then it would mean the world to me if you sign up at leecamp.net. I'm completely independent. Yes, Redacted Tonight was on RT America. I have no association with RT America anymore. I mean, RT America doesn't exist anymore because it's sanctioned into oblivion, but I have no connection to RT. I'm completely independent. I work for my other shows. I work with Mint Press, but they're completely independent. There's no large corporation behind me. There's no fucking country behind me. So it's just you guys. And I hope you'll join at leecamp.net. All right. Let's head on over to rumble.com/Lee Camp. Just give me